Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Development Insights podcast, where we bring you ideas, experiences, and insights about the real estate development industry. My name is Payam Nursalahi, and I'm your host here. My guest for this episode is Hoordad Ghandehari. He's a registered architect in Canada and one of the two founding partners of Icon Architects. Icon Architects has been in business for 16 years, and they specialize in multifamily mixed-use buildings. They range from low-rise to mid-rise and high-rise. Their projects range in size and diversity and location. They cover anywhere between Oshawa, Toronto to Niagara Falls. They have built dozens of communities and projects. In this episode, we focus mostly on the items and steps that happen up front, at the front end of a development project, very early on, from the land acquisition and purchasing a piece of land, all the way to design, development, and assembling the team. And Hoordad dives deep into a whole bunch of items, including things to look out for when you're doing due diligence in terms of selecting your property or the piece of land. Some of general guidelines, things to think about when designing the initial sketches for the building, what to consider, what risk areas to be aware of. And he also talks about the approval process. And at the end of the day, we get into a little bit discussion about the marketing, the needs of the market, how to balance your personal taste and as an architect or as a developer with what really the market needs. We wrap it up with some discussion about the future of the architecture in the city, some guidelines for designing better buildings and better city as a result, and some advice for aspiring architects, anyone who's new to the field and wants to learn and educate themselves. I hope that everyone's going to find those pointers useful. As always, you can find more information about this episode, Hoordad and their company, Icon Architects, on our website, realestatedevelopmentinsights.com, realestatedevelopmentinsights.com. That's all one phrase. I hope you enjoy listening to this episode, and please remember to subscribe to the show. Thank you. Hi, Hoordad. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hi, Payam. I'm a big fan of your show and what you're doing.
Thank you very much. That's really good to hear, and that's a very good way of starting this episode. Hopefully, you're going to feel the same way at the end of this episode as well.
I do. I've actually listened to your podcast and the interviews that you've had with amazing people, amazing sessions with a lot of information. So thank you.
Thank you very much for the comment. And yes, I am lucky. I'm a very lucky person by default that I've had the chance and the opportunity to talk to a lot of great people such as yourself. So let's dive in. Why don't we start with you giving a little bit of an introduction to our audience? Who's Hoordad? What have you been up to?
All right. Yeah. Well, as some people may know, I've been working in this city for almost 26, 27 years. I am an architect, a licensed architect in the city of Toronto, licensed by the Ontario Association of Architects. I used to work for a few firms that did mostly multifamily and mixed-use buildings. And that was probably about maybe 6, 7, 8 years. Then I sort of partnered up with my partner, Reza, and we formed Icon Architects in 2008. So it's been almost 16 years that we've had this office. I did my education back in Iran. The first master's degree I got was from Milli University in Iran. That was back in 1991, 92. And then I did another master's degree at McGill University where I graduated in 2000. So a few years after that. I used to live in Montreal for a few years, and then so I came to Toronto. I worked in Toronto for a couple of years, went to Montreal, did my master's at McGill, came back to Toronto, worked for a few offices, and what I was doing was basically what I'm doing now in my own office, which is mixed-use, multifamily. So all my career, I've basically done mixed-use and multifamily. So that is basically where we are now.
That's pretty good. Thank you very much for that introduction. One of the reasons that I wanted to have this discussion with you is I know your experience in multi-res buildings, mixed-use buildings, and I know you've also worked in mid-rise buildings, infill buildings, either in or also mid-rise buildings outside of
very urban areas. So I think one of the things that we're trying to achieve on this podcast and any other work that we do or any other content that we provide is to create a roadmap and the design or come up with a framework for people to start making decisions, and more so toward people who are new to the real estate development field and they want to have a solid understanding of the steps, where to start, what to do first, how to think about the process. So let's start by some of the basics, I guess. You're an architect. What are some basic definitions and concepts that, and I don't want to get too technical, I don't want to go too much into detail, but maybe just walk us through some of the high-level definitions and concepts that a new developer needs to know when talking to an architect at the beginning of a project. And what I want to make it a little bit more specific. I want to say, you want to pick, you've seen a parcel of land, you're thinking of starting a new project, you're going to probably talk to an architect right at the get-go. Walk me through that process. What should go in someone's mind?
Not a problem. Normally, when people come to us, and it's when they're looking for land. But at that time, they already know what type of a product they are looking for to do on that parcel of land. So it's not like somebody coming to us saying, listen, I've got this parcel of land. I don't know whether to do townhouses, mid-rise, high-rise. No, they've already decided where they are or what they want to do. So if they want to do townhouses or stacked townhouses or basically low-rise, they will be looking for land suitable for that product. If they're a mid-rise builder, they're looking for mid-rise opportunities. Mostly, I would say those are infill. And if they're high-rise builders, they already know what type. So it's not really a question of, okay, what is the type of product I want to put here? Is mostly, is this parcel of land suitable for what I want to do, which is either low-rise, mid-rise, or high-rise. And even before that, there are other aspects of a land when you're looking to purchase a piece of property that should be looked into, is the capacity of the soil and the water table of the soil. And you and I well know that from working in the past on another project where the water table created a ton of issues. So the water table, how far you want to go down, digging down on the land, the soil stability of the land, if there are any easements on the land, if there are any road widenings on the land, those all come into effect when you're trying to figure out what can you do on this piece of property. So you should know all of that in advance. If you don't know it, you want to find out either through the city or through maps available that you can find out what is the final piece of land area that you can build something on. Then we could help them figure out, okay, what type of GFA? GFA stands for gross floor area. What type of GFA we can get out of this or out of that? How much of it is going to be saleable? How much of it is going to be buildable but not saleable? Approximately how many parking spaces we could put there? Can a fire truck get onto the site? Can a garbage truck get onto the site? Turn around, go out. Is there enough room for that? All the other issues that come with selecting a site, and then some of the sites that they look at may not be suitable.
So if I want to take that a step further, and I'm going to say, okay, I've looked at a parcel of land, and I roughly have an idea in that, it's easier obviously for infill products because you have comparables and some points of reference for you to be able to make that judgment a little bit more informed, if you may. But then at some point, okay, I'm like looking at the site, I'm like, you know what, we might be able to do a 5-story mid-rise or a series of small townhouses, maybe some semis. A combination is something in between in that area. It's not a high-rise. It's not going to be a custom home. It's not going to be 2 detached houses or something like that. It's not. So I've ruled out a few. And I'm going to take a step further. I'm going to say, okay, I've sat down with my architect. We've come up with, or I should say my architect has come up with 2 or 3 sketches, rough sketches for me, that ideas. what should go in my mind as a developer when I'm evaluating, and I don't mean that from a financial perspective. Obviously, there's a whole pro forma that needs to happen, like a whole bunch of due diligence needs to happen on either of those project definitions. But if I want to zoom in on just on the practice of architecture, right? And I want to say, you know what? Yes, I can get a 4-story or 5-story, or I can get maybe two sets of stacked townhouses, for example, just throwing it out there, right? What should go in my mind when I'm trying to decide which one's a better suit for that site?
That's a very good question. One thing that really is important to consider is that what is the view of the municipality on what you're proposing? To understand that there are references that you could go to, the most important being the official plan. The official plan of the City of Toronto, for instance, let's talk about Toronto. Every city has their own.
Mm-hmm.
But the official plan is a document, if people don't know that, is a document where the city outlines what they want to see in the future in specific areas. And they've got a map, which is called a land use map. It's got different colors, red for mixed use, yellow for neighborhoods, purple for employment, so on and so forth. So what you want to do, if it is in line with what they've envisioned for the future, then it makes it a lot easier to go through. You don't have to do an official plan amendment. You may need to do a rezoning. And that tells you which of these products that you're looking for is more likely to pass through without a whole lot of resistance, either from the municipality or from the ratepayers that are in the neighborhood. Another thing to consider is with the constantly changing atmosphere and environment of development, generally in the City of Toronto, for instance, the new major streets intensification.
Mm-hmm. That's a major program.
So knowing what is happening in general in the city could also help you help one decide if the property, the land that they're looking at is appropriate, because the time it takes to get something approved could vary if it is not in line with what the city envisions for that area versus if something that is welcomed by the municipality. So that could be taken into consideration. Maybe the timeline of 2 years turns into 1 if there is a less resistance pathway towards what you want to do.
So one aspect is what you're saying, to look at likelihood of getting a faster approval process. And obviously that would mean lesser cost. You don't have to pay that much carrying cost. Soft costs are going to be lower. Interest rate is going to be lower. Your mortgage payments are going to be shorter for a shorter period of time, so that it has all of those effects. But if I want to flip it, the same question, and I want to get a little bit more technical from your perspective as an architect, right? What are the qualifications of an initial sketch? What are the things that an initial sketch should have thought of? And one of the reasons I'm asking this question is that you and I both know that we have a lot of architects and that are smaller offices that work on very beautiful houses. They specialize in very single family, very beautiful, very sophisticated single family housing. And there are a whole bunch of other architectural practices that also focus on high rises, 40-story, 60-story buildings. And there are, in my area of interest, which is somewhere in between the mid-rise, or somewhere between 4 to 10 stories, I would say the number of people who are practicing in that area is far fewer from both of those other groups, right? And from your perspective, from someone that has practiced in this range of projects as well as others, are there any red flags? Maybe I should ask the question this way. What are the red flags that you would look for when you see the first initial sketch? You mentioned the fire truck, and I know the fire truck has been a choking point a whole bunch of times for us. So does anything else come to?
Yeah. The first thing that you want to take a look at is whether the product that you want fits on the site.
Mm-hmm.
Do the width, length of the property allow for the floor plate that you are envisioning putting in there. Let's say if you're talking about a mid-rise, well, everybody knows that the optimum depth of a mid-rise building is around 60 feet. So does it give that to you? Does it allow for proper separation at the rear? Now, we used to have an angular plane to worry about in the city of Toronto, which we don't anymore. Does it have, are you able to provide a proper 5.5 meter separation to the sides if you go above the podium? Are you able to have enough of a front yard setback? So once you apply those general setbacks, are you left with enough of a meat per floor to make this work, to get the number of units or the GFA, the saleable, that you're looking to get out of it? The next thing you want to take a look at is access, pedestrian and vehicular access. Are you situated, like I would say the best cases are where the site's located in a corner, where you're able to provide vehicular access through a secondary street, not the primary street, which is going to be very difficult to get. And the city, rightfully so, discourages that. Because as buildings are being built, as low-rise buildings turn into mid-rise buildings, the street has to have a lesser number of connections that would impede on the pedestrian realm and the streetscape. So you want to have these vehicular entrances on the side streets. So do you have that capability? Is the site, like if you're looking at doing an underground garage, is your site big enough? Do you have the length to have a ramp, a traditional ramp, take the cars down to the underground garage? And when you're doing it, you also have to make sure that when you're going down to the underground, you allow not only going down a floor of height, but you have to allow also for the topsoil that needs to be put on top of the slab for landscaping. And therefore, you're looking to achieve at least between 4.2 to 4.5 meters of height through a ramp that could only have a 15% slope. Mm-hmm. So that's a math exercise, almost like a geometry exercise that you have to do to see if you can meet that on the side. If not, then you may be looking at alternate ways of bringing the cars down to the underground, such as a car elevator. Now, when you do put a car elevator, now you have to think about, okay, well, how many cars are going down this elevator? Is one going to be enough? And if you do go with a car elevator, what is the additional cost? And what are the logistics for issues that may arise out of maintenance if they break down? And also, do you have enough of a queuing space should 5 people get to the elevator at the same time? So all of these need to be considered.
Your circulation there, basically.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Those are the things that initially we think about. And the height that is, we check the OP, we check the zoning, we check what is being proposed around this development. If it's an infill, that's easy. Just go to the city's website and find out, okay, what are the active developments in the proximity of this site? And with a reasonable number of floors and the massing that comes out of respecting all the setbacks and the access point, you pretty much get a built volume. Within that, you can figure out, okay, well, how much GFA am I going to get? What is the usable or saleable area out of this? Does it make sense? That part we take back to the client. We sit down, we figure out, they do their financials to see if this is something that is viable. If not, they just move on to something else.
Perfect. Thank you. I think that's a very good way of and structured way of thinking about how to come up with a concept. Because I do, and I'm sure you have come across some people that they're like, it's not just a matter of putting pen to paper. It has all of those things that you mentioned and possibly more that goes into figuring out even the original concept of a new building. So let's say we went through that exercise. We have a concept. We have at least one, maybe two concepts that we want to go through. We want to go through putting together a team and essentially building up the design. What are your thoughts on that? Like, what are the first decisions? What are the top? Let me ask you this question: what are the top 2 or 3 decisions that the developer needs to make in terms of selecting the team and essentially directing the team?
So the process from that point, once we come up with a sketch that the developer thinks, this is viable, let's run this by the city. Then you go to a PAC meeting along with a planner. They have to hire a planner. With us, we go to the PAC meeting. The 3 of us go to the PAC meeting.
And sorry, just for context, PAC stands for pre-application consultation.
Yes, pre-application consultation with the city. We go to a PAC meeting, and there's at that point, at that meeting, you present what you want to do, and then you get a written response back saying, okay, you know what, this kind of seems like what we envision here. Maybe you're a couple floors too high, too wide, too big, but if you want to make your application and basically roll the dice, they'll give you a list of all the reports and the drawings that have to accompany the architectural drawings to be submitted to the city so they could evaluate whether what you're proposing could work and whether it has any conflicts with anything. For instance, is the sewer capacity enough for these number of units to be added in that corner? Does the traffic allow, do the intersections allow for this added traffic to be added to this neighborhood? Are you going to be casting a lot of shadow now? Because the city has its own guidelines for shadows, how much you can shadow on which side of the street. You have to prepare those shadow studies. You have to have a landscape plan. You have to have the civil engineer do your
site servicing and
the grading, and what we do with runoff water. All of that has to happen, and then a comprehensive package gets put together, gets submitted to the city. By this time, the client should actually, the developer should have a pretty good idea of whether this product is the right product. Because marketing, this whole business is for developers this is a business. They have to make money. If they don't make money, there's no point in doing it. And they have to be sure, is this the right product for this location? And are there assumptions for the end product correct? Are they close to being correct? When you go for a product that is contrary to most of what is being done in a neighborhood, you should think twice. Is this the right product? Why isn't everybody else doing it? Is there a reason?
Great question. That's a very good question.
Get to the bottom of the answer. Maybe this product will not sell well in this location.
And I can attest to that question of why is everyone else not doing it? It applies on multiple levels, because as much as I hate to say it, the development and the construction industry is the story of the old dog and a new trick. So if you many times you come across something that's for some reason is too good to be true, it typically is.
It typically is.
And you don't want, as a developer, you don't want to take the chance and start sinking money in something that is a way uphill battle.
Yeah.
Right?
And this is, what, funny thing you mentioned that a lot of times developers have come to us with a piece of land that they bought really cheap. And they thought it was a steal. And then we realized it had something of a problem which they were not made aware of, either high water or bad soil or extremely steep topography that made whatever they wanted to do harder to do, or there was something that nobody would pick up. who had enough of an experience as a developer.
And that's part of the initial due diligence process, which is,
That's right.
unfortunately, is more complicated than many people realize. It's more expensive. It's more
Absolutely.
complicated, and sometimes it takes a long time. I've been involved in projects that it took months, close to years, in due diligence phase just to figure out what we're doing and if that vision is even has a chance of becoming a reality at some point. So moving on from that topic, like we talked about the process. Now you're well into the point that you're gonna have to make a decision, right? Okay, this is a go. You have a somewhat of an idea of a design. You have a sketch. You've met with the city. Now, from that point onwards, I'm going to need to lean a lot on my architect as one of the, if either the prime consultant or one of the main consultants. What's a new developer or even an experienced one, put that, need to know or need to consider? They might know it, but they might not always consider it in terms of dealing with an architect, an architectural practice, so they can get the best out of you. Like, in other words, what are the biggest hurdles that you feel that, you know what, if this such and such client was not doing this on a daily basis with us, we would have been more productive. We would have given him a better product. Or this is where they're hurting themselves, in other words. Does anything come to mind?
Not really, because we come across many different types of different views and personalities and passion for this work. And we welcome all the different types of basically attitudes that come with being a developer. If they want to have more of a say in the design, we work with them. If they leave us alone to do whatever we want to do, we're fine with that as well. It is obviously nice to know what it is that they want to see. It's always great to have a developer that has a passion.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's just exciting to work with someone who's passionate about what they do,
right?
Rather than just someone who's looking at this from a business perspective. Those are the people that would appreciate innovative design a lot more than people who are not really all that much into or passionate about development or architecture. So those are the people that I like working better with.
So what if I were to reverse that question and say, is there any area that you think a developer should be conscious of not neglecting when they're dealing with you as the architect or overall with the general consultant team? Is there anything that gets neglected that people should pay a little bit more attention to than they are right now?
I would say there's a flip side to that argument that I just made as well, which is, again, because at the end of the day, this is a business. One cannot put too much personal touches on a product. Imagine just designing or renovating a house. A house needs to be renovated, and let's say you are the architect or you are the developer, but you want to renovate it to sell it. You personally may like to paint all the walls red because you like living in a red house. That may not be what the market wants. So to distinguish between your personal taste and what the correct taste for a better marketing strategy is, to differentiate between that, to draw the line, okay, this is, I'm sort of diving into marketing now. I should not let my personal taste go beyond where it's supposed to go. What we as architects have learned where that line is through practice and through mistakes. But a lot of developers have not had that experience to draw that line. How much of your personal taste should you be inputting into a project that at the end of the day is a business and it has to sell? So that is the line that is sometimes difficult to explain to developers
Right.
where that line is.
And it's interesting you say that, because one of our other guests on one of the earlier episodes, they mentioned something similar, that architectural is not just about form, it's not about design. And to your point, it seems like it has a very close relationship with the market, with marketing, with how you're going to perform. And you're right, at the end of the day, probably the single most important decision that you're going to make in terms of the success or failure of your campaign as a whole, as a project, is what type of product you're putting out there, what unit sizes, what unit mixes, what, I won't say finishes probably to a lesser degree, but at least a form. And this can, and what you're saying is that this is not a personal matter. This is not an emotional decision. This is, if you wanna do it right, listen to the market, look at the data, do your homework, and get it right. Is that
Absolutely.
okay? Thank you. Okay, so that's good. So I want to go a little bit further and let's say you had a magic wand. Someone gave Hoordad a magic wand, or for one day you were the mayor or premier, or I don't know if you want to be the prime minister, but you could change one law, one regulation, or one guideline when it comes to design and or approvals or whatever in the industry, with the aim of facilitating the supply chain. Right now we have a housing crisis, we have affordability crisis, we have many different crises. There's no shortage of crises. If you were able to change one thing, what would that be? Does anything come to mind?
I would like to see most of, like with the current infrastructure that we have in place, obviously, if we have more subway lines, then more density could be allocated to newer subway stations, which is happening all towards the north of Yonge Street, which they have planned subway stops all the way to Highway 7. But I would want to facilitate a lot higher density within walk-in distances of all subway stations, which is something the city is actually doing now. They have the MTSAs in place where they're now allowing more density within the major transit stations. So they've started doing that. I just help facilitate that and make it easier for developers to add height. I mean, honestly, I don't think anybody should have a backyard within a walk-in distance to a subway station. That nobody should have that. As it is basically now down along Yonge Street in downtown. Who's got a backyard? No one. We have a shortage of housing, and this shortage of housing is extremely serious. The major streets intensification was a good step towards that. So a lot of the shortage of housing is for lower income people, which means that the housing that is needed is not single family housing up in Newmarket. This is high density housing near subway stations. So I don't know what else to do, but it seems like the city is doing it. They're trying their best, and they're on the right track.
So if I hear you correctly, your argument is that if you're too close to a subway line, existing or future subway line or a major transit line, that piece of land, that parcel of land is too valuable to be wasted on a backyard where we have this issue of massive housing, because that parcel should be allowed to be intensified and
Absolutely.
be part of the solution, which is, frankly, it's much faster and probably easier than running multiple new subway lines or major transit lines across, as we've seen.
Absolutely.
Unfortunately,
What
these
it
things take a
also
long
does,
time.
it also encourages living without a car.
That's true. That's true.
And it facilitates people to get to where they want to go using public transit, which everybody's paying for.
Speaking of crisis, we touched on the housing supply crisis, but let's talk about climate and sustainability, which is a big part of the discussion, rightfully so, right now, because we need to deal with it. We should have dealt with it probably a few decades ago, but at least we can do it today to the best of our ability. What are your thoughts about building better buildings, building more sustainable buildings?
That is highly encourageable. It's a great thing to work towards more sustainable buildings for sure. That is actually happening now. I know in the US, just the number of mass timber buildings has grown to an astonishing. It has its own challenges.
True.
And it's still, as I understand, it's still about 10% more expensive than conventional concrete or steel, but it does have the benefit of not having embodied carbon. It is very environment friendly. I still don't know how much available wood we have if everything went mass timber. I don't know that. It's something I would love to find out.
Yeah, that's a fair point.
There are issues with delivery because there's only so many plants that the mass timber segments, and from what I've heard is, and these pieces are cut very precisely. So you miss one, you mess up one, and you're looking at about a couple months of delivery time. But there are energy efficiency methods that also help with the environment to consider for buildings. There are the fact that you build next to the subway stops, going back to what I was saying, that also helps the environment. Less pollution, less cars.
That's a very true statement.
More EV parking stations, more bicycle spaces, which is exactly what the city is encouraging now. We also have a Toronto Green Standards that we're on version 4 now, and it's encouraging all of these things to happen. And I'm hoping
had an impact.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm hoping that we could all do better. And hopefully at some point, unless it becomes financially feasible, unless there are incentives for the developer to do it, it is hard to get it done.
That's true. It's like we were just saying, at the end of the day, development is a service. A developer is someone who's providing an entrepreneurial service to the community in form of providing housing or places of work or business or you name it. And if you want that business to thrive or at least survive, at the very least, it needs to make money. And with all the regulations that are in place, which I'm going to go out down on a limb and say some of the regulations that we currently have, at least in Toronto and GTA, is probably a case of left and right hands not talking to each other. So it could get better. I'm hopeful that some of those can get better. Yeah. So moving on, like at the end of the day, you just touched on a few different things. You touched on EV. You touched on mass timber, and some of the other practices that we can take on, but aside from, let's say, the advanced stuff, and I called the previous examples advanced items, can you think of any low-hanging fruit that an architect or a design team or a developer can say, you know what, generally speaking, it's better not to have such and such in this building just because of how much energy it creates or how much waste it creates? Does anything pop to your
There are things to consider. It does, however, impact the look of the building. One thing that a lot of people may disagree with me, but a building with no balconies, which is something that used to happen in the 80s. Those balconies all became indoor spaces. And when you look around, even in the summertime, I would say 90% of the balconies are not being used. This is, first of all, building material, cost, and also it is a cold bridge. It is additional cost with not as much of a benefit. So I'm seeing now some of the developers have started doing that. Now, in the old days, when I say the old days, maybe the past 10, 20 years, weather got a bit warmer. People started using their balconies, and a lot of them would just step outside on the balcony, have a smoke. But now, a lot of the buildings don't even allow that.
Yeah.
So that's why you see a lot of these balconies have become storage areas or just basically unused. Especially when you go to high-rise buildings, a lot of the upper floor balconies not even usable half the time
Too windy.
because of the wind.
Yeah, too windy.
So the lowest hanging fruit, I would say, is balconies, because you can achieve the same feeling by doing either a Juliet balcony or sliding doors with a glass guard in front, where you could actually open it up, get the feeling of some fresh air and maybe standing and looking out the view without having to step out onto anything. Provided this, because they used to do it in the 80s, and I know of buildings in the 80s that have been built, all these balconies were integrated into the building and sold, a lot of them as solariums. Where, funny thing is that when people's lifestyle changed, these solariums were no longer useful. Like back in the 90s, when the computers arrived in inside households, in the apartments, people needed a place to put the computer. And a den was very handy. Then what happened was that a lot of people computers became outdated. So nobody had an actual computer with a case and a huge monitor anymore.
Good old days.
And everybody went to smartphones, and those dens were useless until COVID hit. Then people started working from home. And some have continued working from home, which means they actually need a space to dedicate for their work. Dens became, again, an essential part of most of the one-bedroom units. So this is how the evolution of the lifestyle impacts what spaces do you need. Back in the 90s, it was when we used to design two-bedroom units or even one-bedroom units, we were designing, I remember those days, we were designing a proper living room, a proper dining room, and a U-shaped kitchen. That was the fashion those days. And sometimes you go into these older buildings, you can see still some of those units that look like that. But at some point, that dining room and kitchen got combined.
Mm-hmm.
And now what you normally have is a kitchen with an island that also serves as a dining room. So the lifestyle evolution basically goes hand in hand with the unit design. Going back to the balconies, now, if that space gets integrated into the inside as a den, it's going to be a lot more useful and profitable in terms of saleable square footage than a balcony square footage, which is normally not saleable.
I totally agree with you. Like the balconies, especially when it comes to mid-rise buildings and the whole angular plane that you just mentioned, which we used to have to deal with, it added so much complexity, so much cost, and so much delay and time wasted on the construction side, because by the very nature, when you had the angular plane, you had the setbacks, and then or step backs, and then all of these details get very messy.
Yeah.
And you have to figure them out. It costs you a lot of money. It takes a lot of time, and like you said, you half the time you don't end up getting paid for it. But I totally agree. This whole balcony, and I've seen the trend. I think it's reversing. And going back to your point about the computers, the COVID effect, and dens and everything,
Absolutely.
it just re-emphasizes the discussion we were having about marketing, your understanding of market when it comes to designing the units, the layouts, and planning and programming your entire building there, right?
Yeah.
And as much as possible, and this is the hard part, I guess, is to try and future-proof it. Try and guess some of the trends. I think that's the other thing that we had a guest on this podcast not too long ago that we were discussing the effect of window walls and the curtain walls and how over time they degrade and they're going to have a lot of maintenance. And 10, 20 years from now, a lot of these buildings that we have, especially in the downtown core area, there are going to be a lot of maintenance issues. And so things like that are like future-proofing the building as much as possible. We tend to have these conversations, especially when it comes to design development and issues for construction drawings with the designers that like, okay, very well, it looks really good. And I don't think you and I have had that discussion, but sometimes I'm like, okay, but how do you design that gutter that you just drew there? It looks really good. I understand the function, but you can't clean it in 15 years. So those are the things that we want to try and avoid. Okay, so we talked about the balconies, we talked about the future-proofing of designing the buildings, but if you were to guess or if you were to put out some thoughts out there in terms of how to do better quality design of the buildings, both interior and exterior, the way it makes people who live in them feel and enjoy the quality of life, and the people who walk on the streets and see the city from the exterior. Does anything come to mind in terms of maybe a few guidelines or pointers of how can we design better buildings?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm actually happy that you asked this question because I've been asked by a lot of people who visit Toronto. They're asking me, why do most of the buildings look the same? And what I normally tell them is, listen, in the city of Toronto, making it as a developer is not easy. It is hard. There's a lot of competition. And in order for you to turn a profit, you do have to revert to less costly alternatives, which would result in the buildings looking very similar. Now, I believe that every building in a city, like the whole city, could be looked at as a museum or an art gallery, with every building in it being a piece of art in that whole gallery. But the difference is that this piece of art, once you put it up, it's going to sit there for the next at least 150 years. 100 to 150 years.
Hopefully.
We have buildings in the city of Toronto over 150 years. But as far as our lifetime is concerned, they're considered permanent. So it is, and these buildings form the landscape of the city. It impacts everybody who looks at it. As an art piece impacts you when you walk by it and you look at it. So extreme care has to be given. And once you put all these together, you form the city with these individual pieces. And if all these individual pieces start looking the same, you can just imagine what kind of city you're going to be driving through or walking through. So there has to be a system in place to reward developers for good architecture. And currently, there is no system that I know of. So if you want to put up a 24-story building, it is completely up to you if you want to do a spectacular design or you just want to do a basic rectangle window wall structure. You're still going to get 24 floors. But if there was a system in place where the city said, listen, Mr. Developer, you go out of your way here in terms of excellence in architecture. You add to the architectural value of this city if a group of architects approve that you've achieved that, then you get yourself another extra 4 floors. Mm-hmm. It is worth that. It is worth it for the city. Imagine giving up, I don't even know if it's giving up, but you give up an additional extra floor to a 24-story building, making it 28. But in return, you get an architectural masterpiece in the city that's going to sit there for the next 100 years. To me, this is not even a question. Of course, it needs to happen. But there isn't a system. I wish there was.
And I think this is, you and I have had this discussion or similar version of this discussion before, where we talked about the landmark design of different buildings. And I guess what you're saying is that we at this point in time, we're very heavy on the practical side of things. Meaning, obviously, we do have a whole bunch of challenges, which we touched on, the housing challenge, the affordability challenge, but we should not forget the creative challenge, and which is, you know what, you do want to have enough capacity to have housing for everyone, but at the same time, you don't want to leave a legacy of having built a cookie cutter replicas of everything around, and the future generation is just going to douse your sense of creativity, I guess.
Absolutely not. And I believe that every building, when you look at it, you should be able to, in your mind, locate it by its design. It has to be so unique that it has to have that quality of landmark in different contexts. But some buildings are landmarks from a kilometer away. Some are landmarks from a couple of 100 meters away, and some are landmarks up close. Doesn't matter. It has to be unique.
It has to be differentiated
in its architecture.
And you're right. It's a gradual process, because you might not realize it right now, but in 10, 15 years, you're going to see, oh, you know what? Yeah, it doesn't look that nice. The whole thing is maybe a little bit too consistent. We did have an episode and discussion on heritage buildings and how the heritage elements of an existing building can help differentiate. And I know I'm digressing here, but that is one force constraint, if you may, that forces the projects to be a little bit different. And we do have beautiful buildings in the city of Toronto that are prime for redevelopment.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I have my favorites in this city, which I'm absolutely proud of.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate good design wherever I see it by anybody. And it's encouraging to see those.
That's great. I want to start wrapping up our discussion. This has been really fun. If you were to look at the industry as a whole, as your own colleagues in your own profession or other consultants, developers, let's talk about the entire industry. Do you see any bad advice going on? Do you see any bad recommendations that I'm like, you know what, a lot of people are saying that, but I don't know if I necessarily agree with that? Does anything come to mind?
Bad recommendations from who to who? I
want to say toward your clients. Like, are your clients getting the best? Is there a?
I see. You know, as a matter of fact, I don't know where they get some of their advice from, but see some new developers thinking this endeavor of developing, let's say, a mid-rise building, they think it is too easy and it does not need professionals or specialists in every field. And until you become a seasoned developer and you can take on some of those tasks as specialists in that field, you have to leave it to the professionals, because I have seen it more than many times that because of the use of either unprofessional trades who hadn't done this kind of work before, or they lowballed the price because they hadn't done it, they didn't know what they were doing, or material that was not meeting Canadian standards, bought from overseas, they thought they could use that. I've seen that happen many times. Advice from professionals in this field, whether it be the architect, the landscape architect, the contractor, the construction manager, it is extremely valuable that they should not disregard and think that, well, I don't need, I can figure that out myself. I've seen that people fall into that trap many times, and that's hurt people.
And so you're putting emphasis on the source of the advice rather than the actual advice, which is great advice in itself.
Yeah.
You're right. The complexities of what we do not, you don't want to be underestimating this.
Yes.
Another closing question for you. If you were to, let's talk to the architects. You have been doing this for a long time. Let's talk to younger generations and newcomers to your profession. And if you were going to give yourself a version of yourself that is 20 years younger, 30 years younger, what would be some, let's say, 3 pointers that you would give them to have a more successful career? And also, and I don't mean that just in terms of monetary value, and I mean that by, like, it could be in terms of impact, it could be in terms of legacy that you're leaving behind. Does anything come to mind?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I would say keep up to date with all the software that is being used in the profession that expands the opportunities of being able to get a job. And this is for recent grads or newcomers to Canada. Knowing the software that is being currently used in Canada. Of course, newcomers have the challenge of the English language as well. So working on that, improving that as much as they can, helps pave the way for them in advancements in their careers. The last thing I want to say is just hard work. Like anything, like in any profession. Nothing beats hard work and self-teaching. You all of the architects, whether recent grads or newcomers, internationally trained architects, they are all at the age, they're no longer teenagers, which means they have the ability to teach themselves what they don't know. Maybe 30 years ago, information was not as available as it is today. Right now, all you got to do is click on foundation pouring for housing projects in Canada. At least 100 videos pop up on YouTube. It makes you become more familiar with all the concepts. So self-teaching is very important for people to catch up with what is happening, what they could potentially learn in a 9-to-5 job over 5 years. They may be able to achieve in 2 years by self-study and self-teaching, taking courses, going online and reading. That's my advice.
That's very good advice. And I'm just going to take it one step further back at you, that you're absolutely right. Right now, there's no shortage of information going on. Like you just named a few, and there's way more than that as well.
There is no excuse.
Yeah, you can find them. But I'm going to pose a question to you this way. One of the things that we've been trying to do is we've been trying to put together a toolbox for people who work in the industry. And one of the typical questions I ask my guests here is, what do you read, or website or newspaper or magazine or app that helps you stay up to date? You kind of opened the door for me there. So
right.
Can I ask you what you refer to?
Absolutely. The most informative website that I know of that deals with development in the city of Toronto is Urban Toronto. So if you go to urbantoronto.ca, trust me, the material, they post articles, sometimes more than one a day. It is impossible to read them all, but I read as much as I can. It gives a great overview of not just individual projects, city policies, what is happening in the city, what they're doing, what companies are doing, what other developers are doing, current applications, who has been able to achieve what. So Urban Toronto was one of them. And if you are on a LinkedIn, there are other sources like Stories is another one of them that puts up great articles, and just slowly follow some of the larger developers, which they also advertise on LinkedIn, the projects they're working on, the developments they're working on. and the achievements they've been able to have and connect with more people. City of Toronto itself has a great website, which is extremely informative. It explains the process of everything. It has the official plan in it. It has the secondary plans in it. It has the zoning for the City of Toronto in it. It has the current application status in it. So I would say these, as well as the internet in general.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. I took a whole bunch of notes for myself here.
Oh,
Is
my
there
pleasure.
anything that I haven't asked you that I forgot, or are there any final thoughts that you want to share with our audience before we sign off?
I honestly can't think of anything right now. I'm very glad to have had this conversation with you. I've been looking forward to it since you mentioned it, and I hope to have some more discussions with you.
Amazing. We'll definitely make sure to have a follow-up session. Hopefully we can have a deeper dive in some of the topics that we touched on today.
I'm sure once I unplug, I'll remember that stuff that I wanted to talk about and I didn't, but I can't think of it right now.
Circle that and we'll do that episode number 2.
You got it.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Just one last thing before you leave. We've created a document called Real Estate Development Toolbox, which you can download for free from our website at realestatedevelopmentinsights.com. This document is basically the result of us asking our network and our listeners, what is the top tool that you use on a daily basis to keep yourself aware of information that's going on in the industry, the changes, the trends, the technologies, the regulations, and or the tools that you use to make sure that you deliver quality results to your clients and customers, the tools that help you with productivity in what you do, and also any specialized softwares that you think are useful to share with others. So if you think there are resources that you're using on a daily basis and you would like others to know about them, please make sure to let us know, and we will make sure to include it in the next iteration of this toolbox. Thank you very much, and I hope you find this document useful.